been planning this getaway for months. A group of 6 close friends, all looking to celebrate a birthday and get a break from our hectic lives. When we found the listing for a sprawling villa nestled in a secluded part of the countryside, it seemed perfect. The pictures were stunning. An infinity pool overlooking a picturesque valley, spacious rooms with luxurious decor, and rave reviews from previous guests. We booked it without a second thought. The first sign that something was off came when we arrived. The drive up had been longer than expected, winding through narrow, overgrown roads. When we finally reached the villa, it was a far cry from the images online. The gate hung off its hinges. The garden was overrun with weeds, and the once grand facade was peeling and crumbling. We tried contacting the host immediately, but our calls went straight to voicemail, and our messages were left unanswered. With nowhere else to go, and the nearest town miles away, we reluctantly decided to make the best of it. As we unloaded our bags and explored the villa, we noticed more unsettling details. Windows that wouldn't lock, a broken staircase, and rooms filled with old, dusty furniture that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. That first night, strange occurrences began. It started with the lights flickering, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Then we heard the footsteps, soft and deliberate, like someone was creeping around the house. We chalked it up to the old building settling, but as the night wore on, the noises became impossible to ignore. Around midnight, one of our friends, Lisa, swore she saw a figure standing at the end of the hallway, but when we investigated, there was nothing there. We were all on edge, our nerves frayed by the uncanny atmosphere of the villa. The next morning, we decided to search the house more thoroughly. In a locked drawer in one of the bedrooms, we found something that made our blood run cold. A collection of personal belongings, IDs, wallets, and photographs of people who had clearly stayed here before us. Among the items was a journal, its pages filled with desperate entries describing similar experiences, broken promises, unanswered calls, and the creeping sense that they were being watched. As we read through the journal, it became clear that we had fallen into a trap. The villa was part of an elaborate scam, orchestrated by a criminal who preyed on travelers, luring them to this remote location with promises of luxury, only to leave them stranded and isolated. Panic set in. We tried calling for help, but our phones had no signal, and the landline was dead. We decided to stick together and wait for morning, hoping we could hike to the nearest town for help. That night was the worst. The phantom footsteps returned, this time louder and more insistent. Doors slammed shut on their own, and cold gusts of wind swept through the house, extinguishing our candles and plunging us into darkness. We huddled together in the living room, too terrified to sleep. In the early hours of the morning, we heard the unmistakable sound of a car approaching. We rushed to the window, but there was no car, just the faint glow of headlights disappearing into the woods. It was then that we realized we weren't alone. Someone or something was out there, watching us. At dawn, we gathered our things and left the villa. We walked for hours before we finally reached a small village. The locals seemed unsurprised by our story. They'd heard it before. They told us the villa had a dark history and advised us to report it to the authorities. When we finally got home and contacted the police, we learned that several groups had gone missing in that area, and the supposed host was a wanted criminal. The property was under investigation, but the perpetrator remained at large. It's been months since our nightmare at the villa, and the memories still haunt us. We were lucky to escape, but we'll never forget the sense of dread that hung over that place, or the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Next time we'd plan a trip, we'll be a lot more cautious, and we'll stick to well-lit, populated areas. I booked an Airbnb for a solo getaway weekend in the mountains. The quaint little cabin looked like something out of a storybook, nestled among towering pines and overlooking a serene lake. It seemed like the perfect escape from the hustle and bustle of city life. As I arrived, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the landscape. The cabin appeared welcoming, with its warm lights glowing through the windows. But as I stepped inside, a chill crept up my spine, and a sense of unease settled over me. The interior was dimly lit, and the air was heavy with a musty odor. Ignoring my instincts, I brushed it off as typical for an old cabin in the woods. I unpacked my bags and settled in for the night, eager to relax and unwind. As I lay in bed, the silence of the night enveloped me. But then I heard it, a soft whispering, barely audible at first, like a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. I dismissed it as the wind outside until the whispers grew louder, closer, more distinct. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as the whispers formed words. They spoke my name over and over in a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. Paralyzed with fear, I dared not move, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then came the footsteps, a slow, deliberate rhythm echoing through the cabin. Heavy and deliberate, they drew nearer, closer to my bedroom door. Panic consumed me as I fumbled for the light switch. But when the room flooded with light, there was nothing there. Trembling, I convinced myself it was just my imagination running wild. Perhaps I was tired from the journey, my mind playing tricks on me in the unfamiliar surroundings. I forced myself to brush it off and drifted into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, I awoke to find the cabin bathed in sunlight, the events of the previous night already fading from memory. I chalked it up to an overactive imagination and resolved to enjoy the rest of my stay. But as I prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A chill ran down my spine as I glanced back at the cabin, half expecting to see someone or something staring back at me from the shadows. I quickly packed my bags and fled, eager to leave that place behind me. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been alone in that cabin, that something sinister lurked in the darkness, waiting to be unleashed upon the next unsuspecting guest. When I first saw the listing for the secluded Airbnb cabin nestled deep in the heart of the forest, I was immediately drawn to its rustic charm and promise of solitude. After months of endless city noise and the unrelenting demands of my job, a weekend escape sounded perfect. The photos showed a quaint wooden cabin surrounded by towering pines, with a small lake just a short walk away. The reviews were glowing, though few, all praising its tranquility and beauty. I arrived just before sunset. The drive had been longer than expected, winding through narrow, unpaved roads that my GPS had struggled to follow. But when I finally pulled up, the site was exactly as described. The cabin looked inviting, with a wraparound porch and a hammock swaying gently in the evening breeze. I took a deep breath, inhaling the crisp, pine-scented air, and felt a wave of calm wash over me. Inside, the cabin was cozy and well-maintained. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, and the wooden walls were adorned with vintage knickknacks and old photographs. I set my bags down and went through the usual motions, checking the kitchen for utensils, making sure the water ran hot, and ensuring the Wi-Fi worked. Not that I intended to use it much. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I decided to explore the surrounding area. The forest was eerily quiet, the only sound being the crunch of leaves under my boots. I found the lake easily enough, its surface smooth and mirror-like in the fading light. A small, weathered rowboat was tethered to a rickety dock. For a moment, I considered taking it out for a quick row, but the encroaching darkness dissuaded me. Back at the cabin, I settled in for the night, with a book by the fireplace. The quiet was a welcome change, But it wasn't long before I began to notice just how silent it really was. No distant hum of traffic, no planes overhead, not even the chirping of crickets. Just an oppressive, all-encompassing silence. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the remote location, and decided to head to bed early. The bedroom was small but comfortable, with a large window that offered a view of the forest. As I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The trees outside seemed to press closer to the cabin, their dark silhouettes looming menacingly. I closed the curtains tightly and tried to sleep. A loud thud jolted me awake. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened intently. Nothing. Just as I was about to lie back down, I heard it again. A slow, deliberate creak of floorboards. Someone or something was inside the cabin. I tiptoed to the bedroom door and cracked it open. The main room was dark, but I could make out a figure standing by the fireplace. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was tall and seemed to be staring directly at me. I mustered all my courage and flicked on the light. The figure vanished, leaving me staring at an empty room. My rational mind tried to explain it away as a trick of the light, fatigue, or an overactive imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep in my bones. The rest of the night passed fitfully. I kept hearing faint whispers and the occasional rustle, but every time I investigated, I found nothing. By morning, I was exhausted, but eager to explore in the daylight, hoping the sun would dispel the eerie atmosphere. I spent the day hiking and trying to enjoy the natural beauty, but the previous night's events lingered in my mind. I decided to leave a day early. The peace and solitude I had sought had turned into something far more sinister. As I packed my things, I found an old journal tucked under the bed. It looked ancient, with brittle, yellowed pages. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The journal belonged to a woman named Margaret, who had stayed in the cabin decades ago. Her entry started off normal, but quickly turned dark. She wrote about strange noises, unseen presences, and an overwhelming sense of dread. Her final entry was a frantic scrawl. "It's in the cabin, watching, waiting." I didn't stay to read more. I threw my things into my car and left, not daring to look back. As I sped down the narrow road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me leave, hidden in the shadows of the trees. Even now, back in the safety of my apartment, the memory of that cabin haunts me. I can't help but wonder what Margaret saw, and what might still be lurking in the woods, waiting for the next unsuspecting guest.